Marxism it sort of reinvents itself. And so when the sort of classical political economic Marxisms proves a spectacular failure in the late 80s and very early 90s with the collapse of Marxist regimes, especially around the European world, Marxism itself sort of chugged along, but without the emphasis on sort of class and economic struggle, and more with an emphasis on different kinds of identity struggles.
Ah, yeah.
And so Marxism really starts to come into some serious disrepute by the late 1960s because of violent Soviet incursions into European countries that proved no threat to Soviet Russia. And so the Marxists used to always claim that Marxism is a peaceful ideology, but when they saw how non-peaceful Soviet Russia was, Marxism started to lose a lot of credibility. But another intellectual movement started to rise, particularly in the 1970s, which in some ways borrows from Marxism in its view of struggle and power. Yep. And that is a movement that we come to know as post-modernism.
Yep. Tell me, just talking about Russia, what's the nexus between socialism and Marxism? Are they interchangeable terms? Are they polar opposites, vastly different, mutually exclusive, or is there a lot of crossover?
They're definitely not mutually exchangeable terms. They're not synonymous. So, for example, Karl Marx was merely one of, and Marxism was merely one of many different kinds of socialism in the 19th century. Okay. And in the 19th century, socialism and communism tended to be used interchangeably a lot. They are used a lot interchangeably today, but the terms should generally not be confused. So, for example, in England, you had a tradition in the 19th century of sort of non-revolutionary socialism, which basically believed that you need to keep Parliament, you need to keep the government, but through reforms through the law, you should improve the conditions of the working class and you should redistribute the fruits of capitalism more evenly among the people. Now that was a form of socialism, but it was not revolutionary Marxist socialism. And so one of the problems with modern debate is that socialism and Marxism tend to be conflated. What Marxism historically was, and this was sort of spectacularly demonstrated with the Russian revolutions and subsequent revolutions in Europe and in Asia, Marxism was the idea that the best way to social equality is not through sort of reforms taking place in the state. It's by abolishing the state, by abolishing government altogether, and bringing about ultimately a sort of anarchic society of communities where essentially things are shared according to people's needs, according to the famous maxim, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So Marxism is potentially a far more radical doctrine than, say, socialism. So Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, Bernie Sanders in the US, they're kind of classical they're sort of classic English-style socialists. They don't want to abolish the state and create a sort of workers' revolution to overthrow all the existing institutions. But what they do want to do is make the state much bigger in order to redistribute things evenly.
Could that not just be a step towards the Marxist goal of destroying it? I mean, look at Venezuela. I mean, socialism is a path to destruction of the nation.
Well, I mean, I think whenever you...
It's okay to tell me I'm wrong.
No. I mean, whenever you try, historically, what you find is whenever you try to institute a socialist or more radically a Marxist state, the exact opposite of what Marx thought would happen happens. So for Karl Marx, what would happen is that the workers would take over and you'd have this intermediate period called the dictatorship of the proletariat, where the workers would take over the government, they'd take over the factories, but then after a while, when everything got sorted out, when the old regime was finally gotten rid of and people learned to appreciate communism, then the workers, the proletariat would step down from their positions of power and the government would disappear and people would sort of be in concord and they would share and work.
Kumbaya.
Kumbaya, exactly. But of course, historically, what
Oh,
happened...
bless dear Carl's heart.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But of course, historically, what happened was instead of the state sort of getting smaller and sort of just evanescing away, disappearing,
Yes.
it got bigger and bigger and bigger,
Yes.
which is perfectly understandable because if you want people to behave like angels when they're not angels,
That's right.
then you will just constantly have to be coercing them to be angels. And because they will never actually be what you want them to be,
Yep.
the state can never go away.
That's
And
right.
that's historically what has happened. But to link this back up with sort of things that are
It's
going...
hilarious that they think that people who've got absolute power, the authority of a dictatorship, would, let's step aside generously, gregariously, just with an open, free hand. Like, no, comrade, let's get more power. Let's kill our enemies.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And it's amazing the naivety of some of these 19th century radicals. And there were some radicals at the time that pointed out to Karl Marx, hey, this dictatorship of the proletariat, it's just going to stay forever.
Yep.
And Karl Marx just sort of wrote them off as, as intellectually inferior to him. And but history in actual fact proved Marx to be wrong.
Yeah, we just haven't done socialism right yet. That's why it's never worked. So the propagandists tell us.
Yeah, that's right. But when you say to a socialist, oh, no, we just haven't done capitalism right, we just need to perfect it, suddenly the logic of that stops working.
It's a good answer. I haven't actually heard that before, but where have I been? I'm sure it's... Look, something that occurs to me is that the left like to accuse the right of being indistinguishable from Nazi fascists. And they basically say, look, that is the outcome, the manifestation of right-leaning ideology. But I think I like the libertarian scale of things rather than left and right. It's up and down. It's the extremists on both sides, left and right, want a really big government. And that comes with authoritarianism, telling you how you can think, how you can talk. We see the ideas of hate speech and banned speech coming in. But what a true conservative, a true Christian in my mind, really wants is the smallest possible size of government and for socialism, but the voluntary kind of socialism, which the Bible calls charity. It's just love of your neighbor. Nobody's compelled to do anything. And not wanting to go too far down that track, the rejection of the idea that conservatives are fascists is, hang on, the last thing I want is government authority telling me or you how to live. I want the smallest government possible, not no government. I do see the need for some government, but I want the smallest government possible. I want for society to be accountable to each other. And I think ultimately this brings in the place of the church into society, is that democracy, and this can be useful for the democratic socialists who like to call themselves different from socialists. The difference is that no democratic model works without a moral people, without a virtuous people. And that's why Christianity in particular has been very, very useful for every successful, prosperous nation in history. Because whatever model you use, capitalism or socialism, it requires a good character at the base of it. And the fact that human character is not fundamentally good is why socialism is fundamentally democidal. It's going to kill the people. Yeah.
No, look, and again, I mean, socialism understood in that radical term that I mentioned, that radical way I mentioned earlier, you're absolutely right. I mean, at the heart of so many radical and what you might call leftist theories is this idea that human beings can be perfected. And it's central to Karl Marx's thought, and before Karl Marx, it's central to the thought of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was very influential as a theorist in the French Revolution of 1789. And this philosophical view is essentially that human beings are corrupted by forces outside of them, by corrupt institutions, which means that if you can just get rid of the institutions that corrupt us, so if you can get rid of the way we're educated, if you can get rid of the economic system that corrupts us, if you can get rid of the kinds of governments that corrupt us, then we'll actually be the sort of altruistic people that these kinds of ideologies really kind of long for. And as you said, that's precisely, sort of paradoxically why these theories, which long for a kind of utopia, turn out to be such dystopias, because in order to make human beings the altruistic angels that these theories presuppose us to do, you just need a lot of coercion. You need a lot of coercion to do it. And of course, the coercion never, ever goes away.
Yeah.